thrown around to try and describe someone's racial identity, and the light goes out of some people's eyes. I think there's just maybe an understanding needed that the younger generation is a bit more brash, a bit more blunt, a bit more assertive than the more mature generation, perhaps, and we can take that into account as well. But we are about to hear from the more mature, distinguished generation of our panel, from Mr. Kanti Jinna. He's a retired public servant, originally from Fiji. He's been living here in Canberra since 1982, which is probably before some of our younger generation were born. He's passionate about community service, and he's an advisor with the Canberra Multicultural Community Forum. He's also the president of the ACT branch of the Royal Commonwealth Society of Australia. The other interests, I'm told, include writing and spending time with his 4 grandchildren, so he really does span the generations. Please welcome Kanti Jinna.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello. Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I was looking at what we're supposed to be speaking about, and I was told that in the first round, Jeevan and Samreen will speak about their experiences relating to living across cultures, home, and educational environment. I think it will be safe if I stick to that brief, because I don't know much else. Ladies and gentlemen, I come from Fiji, as has been told, and it has been a fantastic experience. Coming from a cultural background of Fiji, my parents came from India. Oh, yes, they did. But my grandfather came to Fiji in 1930. All the brothers and sisters were born in Fiji, and our grandchildren are the only ones who were born at the Calvary Hospital in Canberra. We come from a very, very different background. I consider myself a very confused Hindu Catholic, but that's another discussion we can have at some other time. I also think that my grandparents and my parents could have possibly had a different background. My father possibly of Dravidian background and my mother of Aryan background, because if you look at them, they were rather chalk and cheese. One was quite fair, and the other one like the coconut that we've been hearing about. My parents were engaged before they were born. They were married at the age of 8, and they consummated their married life when they were in their early 20s. So you can see the type of cultural background I come from. Jyoti and I, my wife and I, followed suit. We got married because my father came to a cricket match one day, and I was playing cricket, and I said to him, "What are you doing here? You're 140 miles away from where you should be." He said, "Yes, we've come for your engagement. Go and look at Magan Lal's daughter, and that's going to be your wife." Very interesting. And she is, for the last 51 years. Now, that's a different story. That's a cultural, intergenerational challenge. However, things have changed. My daughter is now married to a person not of Indian background. He is of several backgrounds. He is a Ratuman, his mother was Ratuman, father was European, and a mixture of Fijian. So there you are. What my granddaughter from that marriage is quite a potpourri. I want to tell you a bit about Fiji, where I grew up. If you look at the map of Fiji, and if you look at the main island called Viti Levu, it's a circular island. If you turn left from the village that I was living in, you go to Queen's Road. And if you turn right, you go along King's Road. So somewhere along the line, the king and the queen do meet. I come from a little town called Samambula. Samambula is a very historical town where ladies stood up to the colonial government at one stage because of problems that had taken place. But that's too another story. What I'm trying to tell you about Samabula is that if you can take 1 mile out of Samabula from one end to the other, which it consisted of, then you started off at the Assemblies of God Church, which was patronized mainly by the Fijian community. If you came along the same road, you came to the Arya Kanya Pathshala, which was a school for Indian girls, Hindu girls who belonged to the Arya Samaj. If you came another 50 yards, you came to the Gurudwara, where the Sikhs were living, and where their Gurudwara means their Sikh temple was. Then you came to our house, and our house was right in the middle of the town of Samabula. Behind us was the Shiva temple, and to the right of us was the Ahmadiyya mosque. If you go down another 300 yards, you would come along to the first Islamic mosque in Fiji, in Samabula. It was the Jamem. It was the original first smaller one. The other larger one was built in Suva, the larger one. My neighbors were of a mixed nature. I've told you a bit about the Samabula, the mild spring. But in the little compound that we were living in, our shopkeeper on the left was a Chinese gentleman. His name was Ning Sung, and he had a son called Sung Lee. And right next to him, there was a shopkeeper called Ram Roop. To the right of us, the shopkeeper's name was Ramzan Khan. The third shop from there was belonging to Chandan Singh, Bhai Chandan Singh. Why I'm trying to say this to you is one shop was owned by a Chinese gentleman, another one by a person of North Indian extraction, and the other one of a Sikh extraction. The people who were living on our compound, we are of Gujarati extraction. But behind us, there were people of North Indian extraction. On the double-story building above Ning Sung shop, there were Fijians, there were Rotumans, there were Tongans, there were Samoans. And if you look to your right, there were a couple of part European families. Now, we always beat our chests in Canberra and say, there are 220 different communities here. We are a very multiracial, multicultural community. This is just not even 1 square mile of Samabula, and that's where we grew up. So you can see that we too had a multicultural background, maybe it's of a slightly different nature. I just thought I'll take you along the journey a bit more. After Ning Sung and all this, my mother had come to Fiji in 1938 from India. And just to prove that everything was quite right, I was born in 1939. So there are no mysteries about it. In 1939, 40 years after I went to school, I went to a Catholic school. This is why I'm a very confused Hindu Catholic. I started working. My mother had never been able to go out of Fiji. So in 1975, I was given a fellowship to go to the United Kingdom, and I took my mother along with me. I took my mother along with me to say, look, let's go and meet your relatives. And she did. And I think it was a real tear fest. After we landed in Bombay, we went to her village called Narod. As soon as the person on the rickshaw dropped us there, he said that your house is on the top, you have got to walk up. We walked about 30 yards, and a man came and said to my mother, Gangi, my mother's name was Ganga, but they called her Gangi when she was little. She said, "Tu kyare aavi," means when did you come? And my mother said, "Who are you?" You know, this is 40 years later. She said, "You don't remember me? I'm Yusuf. I used to sit next to you in the same class. We had the same teacher." And of course the tears started flowing from there. And for the rest of the 3 months, that's what it was. I've taken you 7,000 miles away from Fiji to India, where too I could see a change that had, a gigantic change that had taken place. Now, what I'm trying to say today is, when the title was selected, when the subject was selected, it said, "Mixed Up, Intergenerational Views on Living Across Cultures." But I have a few questions to ask you, with the hope that if there is a prize at the end of it, I might win. So please, Chairman, take note. I'm wanting to speak about the choices we've had when we wanted to migrate. I was lucky enough, being the chief librarian for the government of Fiji, that I had the opportunity to decide if I wanted to move, and if I wanted to move, where I wanted to go to. I was lucky. Not everyone has this, and we know the stories that we hear in the newspapers today, and also on radio and television. But the questions are, what are the changes in the lives, in our own lives, as we grow up and develop, and the changes that incur in the country? I just wanted to talk to you about Fiji. From the time I left Fiji in 1982, can you imagine the changes that have taken in the country? I know the audience is very familiar with what has happened in Fiji. But look at Australia. Australia has its schools of its own. We haven't had one, we've had 3. It's almost exactly the same size and of slightly different nature as Fiji. But Fiji and Australia have been changing just as much as we have been. And then, why do we migrate? And how do we migrate? We migrate because we want to go to another country. And the countries themselves decide whether they want to take you or not. They decide exactly what sort of a person they want and what they want to do. Then they also have the question of what people lose when they migrate and what the recipient countries gain. My 5 minutes are up, but I'd like you to ask us questions about that when we're talking on the Q&A. Thank you very much indeed.
Kanti Jinna, thank you very much, Kanti. You would have noticed that Kanti had his own version of maybe the coconut and the magnum, talking about potpourri. Maybe everyone has their own sort of analogy, imagery for cultural diversity. Probably hear a few more during the night. And it did sound to me a little bit like the place that you grew up makes the United Nations look like a local creche or something, doesn't it? Quite diversity.